Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So theoretically, CDBG-DR is only available when it becomes clear that all the other resources the federal government provides for a particular emergency are insufficient. The federal support for a declared emergency seems fairly comprehensive. I mean, FEMA immediately arrives along with the Army Corps to clear debris and other damage. Volunteer organizations and charities also support those efforts. FEMA and SBA also support repair and replacement of homes damaged as a result of disasters. SBA also supports recoveries for businesses and even funds replacement of personal property. Then, of course, these programs are designed to supplement insurance policies, which families and small businesses should carry to protect against catastrophic events. And the IRS allows deductions for casualty losses resulting from disasters. So this is a pretty big network of support. And Mr. Mayor, you've suggested that, well, we know there are some state and local contributions. Sometimes they go in the form of a percentage of matching grant. But, Mr. Mayor, you suggested that the CDBG-DR probably tends to supplant rather than supplement state and local money. And so I wonder if you could give us some of your thoughts on why does that matter? Are there issues of moral hazard that arise? Are there issues about whether a state and local government is better equipped to make judgments about longer-term investments? What about accountability of how this money is spent? Could you elaborate at all on why you think it's a bad idea to supplant state and local money with federal money?
Yeah, sure. Ranking Member Toomey, thank you for the question. So what we learned after 9/11 with the Homeland Security grant funding, and then we also learned this with the federalization through FEMA of natural disasters, is more and more disasters that historically were not federalized, that remain state and local issues to deal with entirely. As we federalize more of those in both the Homeland Security grant world as well as the FEMA world, what the research showed is that when states and localities began to have that predictability that there will be federal funds, they started to defund those kind of programs and move the money elsewhere so that they could spend it differently. And so the concern that I guess I have is, when you step back, nobody probably disagrees that substantively getting help to people is critical, and we should do that as often as much as we can. That goes without question. I guess the key is, where does that help come from? And given the fact that state coffers are high right now, all the funds that have come in through the pandemic and through the infrastructure legislation that you guys passed, there's a lot of money out there. And so, when we get into this issue of creating new permanent federal programs, states and localities, like any other creatures, will act in their own self-interest, and they'll see that as a way that they can then shift funds elsewhere, do other things, because they can kind of have that handout to the federal government to have those funds come in. So again, my broad concern on the supplementation issue is, history has shown us with both the Homeland Security grants and FEMA, as it federalized more and more inherently as state and local disasters historically, that emergency management funds went down, and then preparedness, terrorism, all that activity then got shifted down because they could just wait for the annual influx of funding from the feds, and then I think that's not where we want to go, because it inherently means you're always looking toward Washington for the solution rather than building the capacity there in the state and local communities where things occur. And again, you have the occasional Kentucky tornado event happen. We all know that. But typically, there is some regularity to natural disasters. We know where they occur, which ones will occur, and historically, we tend to know what's going to happen. So creating that predictability is important for state and locals to do, and not rely upon the federal government to sweep in and kind of come to the rescue. We need to build that at the state and local level and save federal funds for kind of some of the most important stuff, especially as we pass $30 trillion in debt.
Yeah, and just to follow up on this issue of the concentration of, I don't think anybody disputes the idea when a disaster strikes, you want to immediately flood the zone with resources to ameliorate the situation as much as you can. But in terms of long-term projects and construction and even future mitigation, as you point out, these kinds of events don't occur uniformly across the country. There are certain regions that are more prone than others. It also happens that the nature of the damage is mostly on property, and it tends to be very valuable property. So Florida is particularly at risk, and Florida, of course, has some of the most valuable property in America. But both coasts tend to have a higher concentration of these risks. So federalizing it, federalizing this long-term mitigation seems to be a subsidy from the interior of the country to the coasts, and I'm sure there are exceptions to that. But is that a fair generalization in your mind, Mr. Mayor?
It's not only a fair generalization, it's a fact. I went through and did the research where it looked at where all the funding had gone over the course of time and in where there was the occurrence of natural disasters. And what you saw is exactly that states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Michigan, the interior part of the country, the Great Plains, New England, the Midwest, the Mountain West, tended not to have that many declared disasters in any given period of time compared to your kind of southern East Coast, the Gulf Coast in the California area. And as a result, what ended up happening is taxpayers in those other states that are, quote, safer, their funding that goes to these programs gets essentially shifted down to taxpayers in those other places. So we're seeing a subsidization occur, which to me is just somewhat inequitable when you think about, again, many of these things are typically stuff historically that were inherently state and locally handled, but we have federalized them over the last 30 years. And if we could step back from that, I think we might see a bit better resiliency and performance at state and local level than we have tended to see as we ramp these things up to the federal government.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Senator Reed from Rhode Island.